Okay, so let's start regarding the time. I think I have to leave a bit earlier. We discussed it. So if you have any questions for me or Tobias, you have to ask right at the beginning of the discussion. So our starting point for our research was basically a contradiction. So on the one hand, we see that global supply chains are often based on extremely poor treatment of workers. We all know that, I think. And on the other hand, we see that labor unions mobilizations for transnational institutions of workers protections has succeeded, mostly during the well-known Rana Plaza Accord. And based on these observations, we ask which causal processes govern these achievements and why do they work? And keeping this in mind, we argue that two features here are very, very crucial. So the first one is combining multiple pathways of influence, each with specific target audiences to build pressure for a reform. And in the short term, we call this multiple pathways. And the second feature is maintaining coalitions by selectively omitting potential wedge issues, and we call these in a short term loose coupling. So let's take a look at the current debate before we discuss our arguments a little bit further. So overall, we find ourselves here in an area of research under the umbrella of the regulation of global supply chains. And most studies are focused on CSR regulations. For instance, Cominetti and Seele 2016, only focusing on different CSR regulations, or some are only focused on nation states and their achievements, or only on NGOs and so on and so on. But in contrast, we take a very open-ended approach. So we take a broader research perspective, similar to Caber et al. 2020, which they propose a floodlight approach, or Ludger Priest from Bochum. He calls for a synopsis of all types of cross-border regulations in their interactions. So let's take a brief look at our theory. So this open-ended approach is also evident in our theoretical framework. So our starting points are industrial disasters like Rana Plaza, Tathreen, the Ali Enterprise fire in Pakistan, for instance. And we assume that those massive industrial disasters drives actors to an extent activism. And since in the most cases, none of these actors has sufficient resources to generate effective regulations on their own. They're not powerful enough, basically. Yeah. So they have to build coalitions. And to capture these coalitions, we use the advocacy coalition framework, mostly written by Paul Sabatier. And the approach of the AFC allows us to uncover processes of shared references by analyzing named ideas and statements in the discourse. So fundamental to this approach is the assumption that coalitions and collaborations emerge and operate on the basis of shared ideas, so-called belief systems, in the words of Paul Sabatier. So ideas and actors form a specific, I would say, coalition network here. So in doing so, the different actors and coalitions direct their demands on an operational action toward different audiences. And here we draw on the concept of transnational influence pathways of regulation to TSAIAC, and also which we have added a path of legal action according to my own work. So within these processes, coalition can also be split up, right? I mean, we saw that in history. And for example, this could be because of the strategy through a pathway of influence did not work out, or there was a big dispute among those coalition actors or partners. So the best case is here in this scenario that the coalitions achieve new order formations, like a new contract or a new international framework agreement, but we don't know at this point. Yeah, it's quite open-ended here. So let's take a look at our methods. So these are the cases we picked. Basically 4 cases, 2 cases in the ready-made garment industry and 2 cases in the mining industry. These are all very prominent cases in the international discourse here, and all accidents created a very strong pressure on the actors to act because they're quite heavy, and all have led to extensive campaigns, all mobilization networks around the world for better working conditions. And the condition was that the cases had sufficient media resonance so that we can trace the development of the different actors included here. And over years, I mean, we have done that by the start, and I think we collect data to 2019, I think, yeah. So we draw here on a secondary analysis of 18 expert interviews and over 570 articles out of international newspapers, for example, New York Times and the Süddeutsche in Germany, and as well over 90 supplementary documents. Yeah. Here are all evaluation methods stand side by side as equally important and also serve the purpose of mutual verification. So the process tracing here first captures the descriptive flow and the cause-effect relationships. The temporal bracketing makes it possible to classify the temporal time periods or specific time periods based on prominently discussed topics in the discourse. And thus the process becomes clearer for our analysis, because sometimes you trace over 7 years and the whole network is mainly too big and too overwhelming to learn something out of your plot. Yeah. So these periods, these time periods, are used for the discourse network calculation using the DNA, which was coded by Philip Leifred at the University of Essex. And after coding the name claims in the discourse, revealing the discursive collisions, the collisions were verified with the process tracing. So we looked up, is this really true what they say in the discourse, and or is it also mentioned in the expert interviews? So let's take a look at our empirical findings regarding our time frame. I think it's the best way to focus on key examples here. And we have 2 mechanisms, as I mentioned it. And the first mechanism is using multiple pathways of influence, each with specific audiences to build pressure for reform. So, and here are we are focusing on the Turkish case, Turkish coal mine in the city of Soma. Coal mine was named Enes Maden Okashki. And on the right, we see the trade union transnational coalition, which is highlighted in red. So we are only interested right now in the red clustered coalition. Yeah. And this coalition is about the German trade union IGBCE, the Republican People Party in Turkey, and the Turkish mining union Maden İş, to build up a trade union training center in the city of Soma to ensure the safety in mining in this area. So let's take a look at the process. Initially, every actor has strong discursive demands on the company to improve the safety conditions, yeah, through the market pathway. The market pathway is always focused on companies. In the second step, the national and local unions in the target country were supported mainly through the German trade unions. And this was due to the civil society pathway. And finally, following this, an expanded joint activism was created through the market pathway. It was really built up during the whole process. And finally, the government in Soma was convinced to allow a union education center to build. So let's take a look at another case. We are now not in the mining industry. We are focusing now on the ready-made garment industry, and especially on the case of Ali Enterprises in Pakistan. So this is about the cooperation between the German trade union Industriegewerkschaft Metall, IGM, Verdi, and the Confederation GGB in Germany, and the Pakistani Trade Union Federation, NTUF, National Trade Union Federation of Pakistan. And also the German NGO Medico International. And they wanted also to build here a national trade union training center, also to ensure the safety in the sector. And here we have to focus only on the blue clustered network area. And yeah, as you can see, they're mainly trade union actors. So the German trade unions and the Pakistani Trade Union Confederation referred in terms to their core to a solidarity among trade unionists, a solidarity among workers. And that's also justified by the membership of all in the Global Union Federation Industrial. That was, you can call it a master frame, for instance. Yeah. And a part of these overlaps, however, special problems or problems which might come up were not addressed to keep the coalition working through the whole process. And maybe this is good to focus on these two statements here. First, we can focus the statement by the expert of the National Trade Union Federation of Pakistan. So he or she said, we are on the left side of the trade union, far left side and critical side, and we have a different tradition, political tradition. And the German Industriegewerkschaft Metall, the biggest union in the world, they were much focused on the opinion of industrial. So they called them up and said, okay, we didn't know here about anything about the National Trade Union Federation of Pakistan. And they checked it, and industrial described the National Trade Union Federation as a quite active and veritable union. And this was the only argument that works. Nothing more was needed for the Industriegewerkschaft Metall in Germany. They said, okay, when industrial says, okay, we can done it, and we do not discuss anything else. Okay. So the conclusion is quite heavy, I think. Maybe we should rush a little bit through the slides. I think the most of the points I have already said. So our starting point was the question of why transnational union mobilization for workers' protective institutional change is successful. And so in doing so, we argued that combining multiple pathways of influence, each with specific target audiences, build up for reform pressure. And also we argued that advocacy coalitions are maintained through selective omissions of potential wedge issues, as I showed that in the key examples. So regarding our sampling, I think you know now, I've said it that we, instead of selecting cases based on developed regulations and using these cases as evidence of regulations that works, we choose a much more open-ended approach. And maybe we can fasten this a little bit up. I think it's important to say something about the status of these two mechanisms. So in all four cases, these two mechanisms presented are demonstrated in the coalitions with union actors. So the mechanisms increased the likelihood of success in creating regulatory institutions, but we don't think that this is mandatory here. We think that both mechanisms can be used as a research guiding hypothesis for further case studies. Yeah. Okay.